When a bigoted police officer captures a lady he believes to be a regular citizen, without realizing he has committed a career-ending error, what will let us know in the comment section below whether she didn't make the one phone call that changed everything. Cassandra Ellison, who was fleeing, sat still in her matte black Jeep Grand Cherokee. With her index finger delicately pressing the screen of the military-grade GPS installed on her dashboard, she realized she wasn't lost. After years of building, the back roads at Fort Mitchell have changed, and despite having served there a dozen times, she knew that even the most illustrious generals may become disoriented. When in her rear view, blue and red lights burst and the earth struggled to remain motionless. As she raised her gaze to the Georgia highway, the hum of the passing vehicles vanished into the distance. She exhaled as her reflection flashed behind her, not in terror nor even aggravation, but the heavy sigh of exhaustion that only black people could relate to out when history whispers, "Don't do it again," and taps you on the shoulder. The window hands were lowered so I could see them, and the bark was needlessly sharp. In an attempt to irritate him, Officer Brent Mallory approached one pistol close to his belt with both hands on it. His voice was already tinged with suspicion that she posed a threat, and Cassandra's hands were already at rest. At 10 and 2, her finely manicured nails pound softly in rhythm on the driving wheel. She gazed straight ahead, shoulders square, using an old tactic to lower her heart rate. "I need to see your license, ma'am." Her face was composed with the type of grace that is taught in battle chambers, not beauty salons. "And registering," he snapped, and she responded calmly. He didn't respond just yet, watched her as if she would suddenly lunge, and she moved slowly and purposefully. She took the paperwork out of her glove box while maintaining eye contact with her hands and avoiding any abrupt movements. It didn't matter that she had 3 stars, since that's what all black parents have taught their kids from the beginning of time, sewn into her shoulder epaulets, or that she had occupied the opposite seat from foreign presidents in a capacity that represented the Mallory Cassandra Ellison. A U.S. military officer was simply another woman in a dark automobile on the wrong side of the road. With her voice remaining flat, she supplied the most recent highway registrations. Still being courteous, I was stopped for modifying my GPS while parked off the road. There was nothing unlawful about it, that he moved back, hands still close, without even looking at the papers. She averted her head as he tapped the latch step with his pistol thumb. Stamp out, slowly, a man in a gray Toyota Camry. "I'm not under arrest." Stopped across the street and pointed his phone's camera at the situation. A second car paused and someone yelled, "Why? Is she being stopped even though she'd done nothing wrong and the officer chose to disregard them?" Cassandra looked at the light phone screen across the highway. The reality didn't surprise her these days. She unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and left the room without making any further motions until it became viral. The type of control that is instilled in those who have learnt the importance of uniform. And Mallory questioned, "Consequence. Are you carrying any weapons?" And she turned slightly to display her entire body. "No, officer, I'm on duty and my weapons are locked." "On base," he sneered. "You're military now." "I didn't say military." He grinned and said, "Active duty. Yeah. What are you, a mechanic?" Cassandra didn't respond as the traffic slid by behind them like a sluggish muson. Uncertain if they were watching a tragedy or a lesson. The audience, she had not survived the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and the Pentagon's politics were upended by a guy who inspected her car and didn't finish reading her ID card. He tapped the rear glass as if he was looking for some excuse for his violent behavior, using his torch before going back to her and finding anything in the car that I should be aware of, officer. You've got it tinted. Windows, which is prohibited. Nevertheless, military vehicles registered on base the Marne are exempt. I didn't want a lecture, ma'am. I can show you the paperwork. I'm full of suspicion, but I'm not General Ellison or even Cassandra. I want to contact someone, officer. She shifted her weight after a moment of disgust. Now I think that this is far from being a normal stop and you'll... He mumbled. Call someone, okay? You're not going anywhere, hands behind. You're back. And suddenly he was securing her wrists with a nettle cold. As he pulled her towards the hood of the car, one knee was placed against the small of her back on the still warm tarmac beneath her. Boots. 2 additional automobiles were hauled in while the camera across the street zoomed in on her own Jeep. Someone screamed Cassandra's name, not her rank, over her head. Didn't go blank. It wasn't even pinned, humiliated or restricted, by a guy who was unable to read the stars on her collar, but she kept her wits about her and glanced up at the clear sky. Mallory was unaware that she couldn't have known, but when she made this entire interstate would turn into a chessboard when she called and delivered the code, and even though she didn't say anything yet, the piece would move at her order. There was stillness as he had his chance to enjoy this false sense of authority. It came after the type that seems heavy and thick, as if it were waiting for a storm to break it. But the storm wasn't approaching. It had just woken up and was coming from Washington, D.C., but she didn't shout. Cassandra Ellison remained breathing as her face was softly placed against the hood of her automobile without any resistance. Even take a slower breath and release it more, slowly, not because of fear but because she, recognizing that constraint is a type of power in and of itself. Officer Brent Mallory fumbled at her, patting her down and looking in her pockets like she was a street-level suspect. She could hear his belt buckle, jingling with each breath, and his breath smelt like old coffee and control difficulties. He murmured, I bet you're one of those military types who think you're above the law. No words could be used to describe such affirmative action hires, Cassandra stated. Employed against you, even those who are right, particularly those who are right across the road. Captain Miguel Herrera had moved his phone from the side of his vehicle, was still filming hand steady as a surgeon, in contrast to the others who were curiously observing Miguel. He didn't yet know Cassandra's name, but he could tell by her squared shoulders and straight posture. Even though he wanted to stop filming, he continued since he knew Athera. He was an army captain who has served long enough to understand what stripes meant when he said that the woman was being shackled, was someone. She wasn't just a random person with a grudge. This is Unit 4782 OD. Mallory was unaware that he was on his radio dispatch. I'm bringing the uncooperative female suspect who claims to be military, but she's definitely lying. Roger heard the voice on the other line crackle. You need backup. And he looked, observing the group of automobiles, the phones in the air, and just the crow. Cassandra moved just enough to not frighten him, but I'll handle it. Sufficient to relieve the strain on her wrists. You are committing an error, officer. He scoffed. Yes. And what's that? His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a dagger dipped in ice. She didn't respond. Therefore, the commanding officer is going to come down here and spank me. Rather, she slightly cocked her head so that her voice could be heard above the crowd. Please notify Fort Mitchell Base Operations that General Cassandra Ellison is being held off Highway 94 by calling them. Miguel's name struck like a hammer at southbound marker 212. His mouth was slightly wide as he picked up his phone. After dropping it for a brief while, General Cassandra Ellison was more than simply a person. She was a legendary figure. NATO command recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal for 3 deployments, is one of the highest-ranking black woman in the U.S. Army's history, was being handcuffed like a small-time criminal. Miguel's instincts took over as he stepped into the Georgia roadside. Rhodes' voice was clear, forceful, and devoid of emotion as he raised his badge from around his neck and held it high. I'm asking you to halt this, sir. Captain Miguel Herrera of the U.S. Army. Mallory instantly froze, gently turning his head and squinting as if he didn't believe what he was hearing. Captain, who the heck are you? General Cassandra Ellison is that lady, and she is superior to everyone in this state. Even your Sheriff. Mallory glanced down at Cassandra before turning back to Miguel. Miguel said, "Nobody's above the law," and he muttered, "No matter." Is Mallory pulling Cassandra by tightening his hold on her arm? Honest, you military types always believe that you can use rank as if it had real-world significance. Cassandra stood up and was now near enough to meet Mallory's gaze. Her face was not angry, shown to clarity that this is the real-world officer and that the portion you never imagined would ever be touched is going to happen. He fled and turned to open his cruiser's rear door, but the noise that everything changed. When a helicopter approached with a low, warring chop, you could tell it was military by the precision. It wasn't news or life flight. Before your ears even noticed the rotor's dull pounding, which caused your chest to shudder as it hovered. It was matte gray, and it dropped just out of sight a half-mile down the road. The hand of the Mallory fell off the cruiser and the body with no local insignia. He mumbled, "What the hell is that?" Cassandra didn't respond, and she didn't. Her phone was still in the Jeep's cup holder and buzzed once, twice, and then again. Became quiet, and a black SUV arrived as Colonel Teresa Maddox was already on her way. With veiled windows and a little government plate on the bumper. The cars behind the queue are quick and tidy. Before the car had stopped, the passenger door opened and a woman got out. Teresa Miguel had keen eyes that didn't miss a step, silver hair put back into a tight bun, and a crisp navy pantsuit. Mallory didn't move back instinctively. "Which of you is to blame?" Teresa asked inane questions, and her voice didn't have to be loud. It might have carried the weight of authority in each word Officer Mallory spoke. This woman was Teresa brought up the issue of recalcitrant people who could be posing as military personnel. He blinked in hand stillness, perplexed. Teresa went right past him to Cassandra, who was still wearing handcuffs that were pressing into her wrists. "You're all right, General. I'm all right." Teresa took a little key from her, and Cassandra said, "I'm just waiting for someone with common sense to arrive." Miguel exhaled after taking 3 seconds to reach into his pocket and remove the handcuffs. He was unaware that he had been keeping Teresa in a detention. 3-star General, you disregarded a direct order without confirming her identity, declaration of rank, and broke federal laws pertaining to active military service. Do you know what it implies, staff? Mallory opened his mouth but stopped. Teresa reiterated that whatever you say deepens the hole. For the first time he noticed as he looked around how many cameras were recording, not just the dash cams on phones or the body CCTV footage from passing sheriff's office officers and even a drone flying in silence. Cassandra adjusted her posture by rolling her shoulders overhead, and her wrists were hot and aching. But although Mallory backed down, her spine didn't bend. When he eventually said, "Your job," Cassandra stuttered something about simply doing his job, "is not to presume, not to threaten, and most especially not to degrade civilians because they don't meet your standards for who should be in a place." Where he didn't reply since there was nothing else to say, and the stillness became heavier, now bearing result. And Cassandra didn't glance around as she brushed the dirt from her sleeves and headed towards her Jeep. Didn't need to since they already knew her name, and the room was antiseptic, frigid, and terribly. In the internal affairs meeting room, Officer Brent Mallory, who was too white for comfort, sat rigidly with his hands clenched. His leg jumped beneath the surface of the table in front of him, taut as anxious energy tried to get out. Professionalism. A single folder full of printed screenshots was left open in the middle of the table. Across from him sat Deputy Chief Allen's written declarations and time-stamped video with his fingers tucked beneath his chin and his expression inscrutable. Breyer hadn't spoken, and after 5 minutes of staring, "Do you recognize who it is?" Brent is in a daze after hearing the name General Cassandra Ellison, now 100 times over the past 24 hours, echoed by hearing it from Breyer's mouth. Demonstrators and his own co-workers murmured it in the break room as if it were sacrosanct. Made it seem heavier, he acknowledged. Breyer then reclined in his chair. Didn't tell me her full name, Bria raised when you cuffed her. She raised an eyebrow when she emphasized that she was on active duty, although everyone says that all people have claimed to be Marine senators on occasion. One man even proclaimed Breyer, Beyoncé's cousin, didn't laugh, didn't protest, and didn't belittle him. Breyer tapped his, but you didn't threaten him. What caused you to increase it? Your fingers were rhythmically and slowly tapping the table. Brent paused and was disdainful, not immediately following directions, seemed to be concealing something, such as credentials, a name badge, or military identity. When I originally came up, she was changing her GPS, so I didn't see any. What caused the initial stop? Breyer just gazed at the spot where she was parked on the side of the road without saying anything. Brent glanced down at his hands once more, but this time the stillness was worse than ever. Yelling. And after a break, Breyer spoke again. But this time, Brent was calmer. She's not only a high-ranking general, she's a historical figure who made you bind her. Brent's lips opened on the side of the road as if she were intruding at a petrol station, but nothing came out. Breyer leaned forward and added, "Now you embarrass this department, city, and you went above and beyond by giving everyone who has ever accused us of racism. Hey, Brent, check the brand new headline with your name on it, but I didn't do it because she is black, yet whether you realized it or not, you did shoot her back. You believe that's why the others are allowed to make the distinction between the two, and you can guess what that line is now gazing at." Cassandra Ellison was sitting in her living room, literally across town. In the quiet, gentle shadows of her brother's brownstone flat, her hair was tied up and her boots were removed, but Elijah was sitting across from her with her legs crossed and her thoughts were still in full uniform. With his legal pad lying on his thigh, he swapped in his spectacles, although continuing to act as though he didn't need them. His college activist sweatshirt for a blue suit, but his heart remained the same. "Are you certain you want to go public?" Cassandra was looking at her phone screen watching the Mallory's video again, and she didn't immediately respond when asked. The hush that followed Miguel's entrance and her own constraint, she answered, "I didn't," when her name was eventually said out loud and was already known. Elijah nodded, "But I have to decide how to react now that it's out. I don't want to make this about myself, but the press is gradually demanding a statement. Is about you." He stated unequivocally that the man stopped you, not a stranger. A lady who has bled, battled, and survived, and who leads whole divisions. You are an expert on stuff that the majority of Americans only learn from history books and CNN. "It's too late," he replied. "But the question is, symbol cat. I don't want to be a symbol." Given that she put her phone down, what type of symbol would you be? "If I were you, I would hold a press," she said quietly, and he sat back. "I would name people, demand changes to the firing policy, and ensure that during sensitivity training, all of the police officers in that city view your video till what would you do if you were him?" She grinned at the end of time. "If I were her, I would remind you that this isn't about getting even. Accountability." She nodded, and a group of teens stood quietly outside the flat. One of the banners on the corner said, "She protected the country, but who protects her the most?" Cassandra Rose's doorbell rang and Elijah moved slowly and purposefully. As she opened the door, Captain Miguel Herrera appeared behind her. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he added, holding a hallway hat. She stepped. "Putting that aside, you're welcome here." He walked in and surveyed the living area. "The pictures of Cassandra with the white-black troops and the medals on the shelf," he added. "I just came to say thank you." and Brown was beaming like family. "I don't think I could have remained as composed as you did," she said. Miguel glanced at her and murmured, "You changed," with a little grin that I've practiced for years. "Something from yesterday will last longer than any of us, and for once she giggled quietly. "The sort of thing that happens when the hero doesn't die in the third act?" he inquired, and she shook her. "Laugh," she said, "when you're still hurting, but healing, too. Do you regret not fighting back?" "No, because if I had, neither you nor it would be here at this moment." Guy would have written the conclusion himself with that camera, but now the world's Cassandra's phone lighted up again with a text message while she was composing it for him. Special briefing regarding national awareness was requested by Colonel Teresa Mattis. She looked at it for a long moment before locking the screen. "Are you ready? You're not just a general anymore, Ma'am Cassandra," she added, and Miguel nodded, turned to face him, gaze steady but calm. "No, I'm a mirror now, and he's not alone. One person will have to observe the media vehicles forming a silent wall outside the South. With continuous focus, entry wires snake over the pavement like Vine's cameras pointing at the podium. Behind the barricades, a throng had assembled, with some brandishing flags and others holding cardboard placards that had markers on them. It should preserve dignity inside the organization, but sayings like, "We stand with Cassandra," and "rank doesn't erase color," reporters muttered among themselves as the air in the briefing room hummed with preparation, themselves trying notepads, phones, microphones, and cameras. This time, there were no press tip-offs or leaks, just a brief statement. General Cassandra Ellison will address at 2 p.m., following a speech earlier that morning by the White House. Eastern no at 2 p.m., questions will be accepted. Precisely when she entered just her in uniform with her chest adorned with military fanfare and encouragement. After 20 years of service and earning medals on 3 continents, she walked to the stage, her expression composed but her eyes displaying a reality that no one could ignore. She didn't struggle with. She started without clearing her throat with notes. "My name is Cassandra Ellison, and I am a soldier, a sister, a daughter, and I have 26 years of military service. I've bargained with warlords, transported injured men into battle," and she stopped for a short while standing at the funerals of men and women who never returned home over sand. "And last week I not as a criminal or a menace. I was standing by the side of a Georgia highway with my face against the hood of my car. However, the crowd held its breath because someone thought my skin was more important than my stars. I'm here today to expose a system where a man may be humiliated. Even if a black lady wearing a uniform is adorned with metal, she is nonetheless seen as suspect before speaking in a service location. Only when it suits the story is it recognized, and her dignity is conditional, looked up to face the crowd's gaze, the nation's cameras, and I won't ask for justice since it is not something that needs to be pleaded for, and I will anticipate it not only for myself, but also for, I was fortunate, compared to the innumerable others who don't have a camera close by or wear a uniform, but luck shouldn't be No one applauded since it was merely a shield between someone and injustice. Wasn't strong, but since it weighed too much in her chest, she offered one more nod before retreating outdoors, where the rising stillness was broken, of chanting General Ellison, General Ellison, not loud, not angry, just firm. Cassandra returned to the safe wing Teresa, her heels resonating off the marble as she strode along the corridor. Teresa's statement that Maddox was waiting for was the sound of a nation turning its head. Cassandra arched her eyebrows, saying, "It's easier to look than it is to look, Teresa." Responded that evening when the Internal Affairs Board sent Officer Brent Mallory a sealed package containing the words, "We were straightforward and efficient in our instant messaging, and your job with the Kingsford Police Department is," he sat, in his empty flat after being fired, with the news playing softly in the background. The video shows her face, voice, Andre Marks. He turned off the television. He considered sending a message of apology, statement, but what would it say? I was unaware that the truth wasn't about race. It had always been about race, but not in a shouting, cross-burning insult. However, in that more subdued manner, the presumptions, suspicions, and need. He asked questions first to gain control, then, he gazed at the page until the words Captain Miguel Herrera returned to Fort Mitchell Base in a flash across town. His phone kept vibrating with thank you notes and interview requests. He mostly disregarded the Secretary of Defense's letter of praise, instead choosing to walk to the base chapel. Closed his eyes when seated in the second pew. He did not offer a prayer in the conventional sense, but he took a moment and considered how near even worse that day may have been over with a different name on a hashtag, for which he expressed gratitude. 2 days later, Cassandra was outside a public school in southeast Washington, D.C. A 9th grade teacher was asked to speak, not a legislator or a network. There were several black and brown children in the classroom, which was named Miss Carmichael, restless, doubtful, inquisitive, and truly prepared to present. One child chuckled. General in here and expect us not to ask questions, said Cassandra, grinned and said, what do you want? A girl in the front row held up her hand. But when the policeman pulled you over, you were afraid. Sand paused before responding. The reason I remained steady was because I had already experienced fear, and I discovered that fear cannot speak for me. A kid leaning in the back advanced, but because rank never stops, why didn't you simply reprimand him since you outranked him? Bullets. And I was aware that my strength was in being unquestionable rather than in yelling. Cassandra nodded slowly and said, do you think that's enough? In a lower voice. A little girl with tight braids and unblinking eyes looked at her, although it's not sufficient, but it's a start. The girl nodded, and then each pupil did so without being asked, stood up without fanfare or claps, just stood because, on sometimes it speaks louder than later that week's applause. A bipartisan proposal was adopted by Congress mandating that all law enforcement agencies that receive federal funds enforce the Ellison Standards requirement for military de-escalation training, racial prejudice recalibration programs, and verification processes weren't everything, but they were more than nothing, and it brought her name back to her Virginia roots. The late evening sun was creating long shadows over the family as Cassandra strolled barefoot across the floor of her living room. She paused in front of one of the pictures on her wall that showed her as a child. At her father's burial, she was wearing fatigues with a folded flag. Her father had also served in the military, served in Vietnam, and returned home to be referred to as the N-word in his own nation. Yet he never received the awards, but he was burdened by her softly touching the frame's edge. Immediately proceeded to the balcony where the scent of heat and grass filled the air. Something different, like freshness, Elijah called her that evening. Just said, I'm proud of you. And she replied, thank you. But it's not. He hesitated. It's never her. Grinned. That's why we keep coming. And she peered out as she hung up. She had donned many outfits over the fading horizon, as the last rays of light disappeared beneath the metropolitan skyline. Uniforms engaged in several conflicts. But the one she had just won felt unique, because she was defending her home this time rather than an adversary from elsewhere. And at last, home had begun to pay attention.